The screech of brakes and the crunch of metal against concrete at 6:47 a.m. was not how Marcus Chen had planned to start his Tuesday morning. But as he stood in his bathrobe, coffee mug still steaming in his hand, watching steam rise from the crumpled hood of a white BMW X5 that was now airborne over his specially modified driveway, he couldn't help but smile. 3 years of harassment, illegal parking, and property destruction had finally come to this moment, and it was even more satisfying than he'd imagined. The BMW belonged to Linda Hartwell, better known throughout Meadowbrook Estates as HOA Karen Supreme, though never to her face. At 52, Linda had transformed being a homeowners association board member into a full-time career of making everyone else's life miserable. Her platinum blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her yoga pants cost more than most people's rent, and her sense of entitlement could be seen from space. Marcus had moved to the quiet suburban neighborhood 18 months ago, drawn by the promise of peaceful living after years in a cramped city apartment. He'd saved every penny for 5 years to afford the modest 2-story house on Maple Street, complete with a decent-sized front yard and a driveway that would accommodate his work truck and his vintage motorcycle. What the real estate agent hadn't mentioned was that his next-door neighbor considered property lines to be mere suggestions. The trouble started on his very first week. Marcus had come home from his job at the engineering firm to find Linda's BMW parked squarely across the end of his driveway, blocking him from pulling in. When he knocked on her door, she opened it with a kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Oh, you must be the new neighbor," she'd said, looking him up and down with obvious disapproval. "I'm Linda Hartwell, HOA board member. I was just running in to grab something. I'll move it in a few minutes." Those few minutes turned into 2 hours. When Marcus knocked again, Linda informed him through the door that she was indisposed and would move it when convenient. He ended up parking on the street and walking the extra 50 yards, chalking it up to a misunderstanding. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. Over the following months, Linda's parking violations became increasingly brazen. She'd block his driveway while getting her nails done during her weekly bridge club meetings and once memorably, during her son's entire graduation party that lasted until 2 a.m. Each time Marcus confronted her, she had a different excuse. She was expecting a delivery, her driveway was being cleaned, or her personal favorite. She claimed there was confusion about where the property line actually was. The property line excuse led to Linda's next escalation. She began parking not just at the end of his driveway, but actually on it, claiming that the concrete extended onto what she insisted was a shared easement. When Marcus showed her the property survey clearly marking the boundaries, she dismissed it as outdated and suggested he hire a real surveyor if he wanted to make a fuss. Marcus tried every official channel. He filed complaints with the HOA, but Linda was on the board and somehow his complaints kept getting misfiled or lost in committee. He called the police, but they said it was a civil matter since there was a property dispute. The city's parking enforcement said they didn't ticket on private driveways. He was trapped in bureaucratic quicksand while Linda grew bolder. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when Marcus returned from a business trip to find that Linda hadn't just parked on his driveway, she hosted her entire book club there. 8 cars were arranged in his driveway and spilling onto his front lawn, leaving tire ruts in the grass he'd spent months nurturing back to health. When he confronted the group, Linda announced to her friends that Marcus was the difficult neighbor she told them about and they should ignore his hysterics. That night, Marcus made a decision. If the system wouldn't protect his property rights, he'd engineer his own solution. After all, he hadn't spent 6 years studying mechanical engineering for nothing. The next morning, he started digging. Marcus spent the first week researching his plan with the same methodical precision he applied to bridge designs at work. The beauty of this solution lay in its simplicity and its complete legality. He wasn't building a trap or a weapon. He was simply modifying his own driveway on his own property to make unauthorized parking uncomfortable. The concept was based on a hydraulic car lift system, the kind used in auto shops but modified for a very different purpose. Instead of lifting cars for maintenance, his system would activate only when significant weight was placed on a specific section of his driveway for more than 30 seconds, long enough to avoid triggering when he drove over it, but short enough to catch lingering trespassers. Working evenings and weekends, Marcus carefully excavated a section of his driveway closest to the street. His neighbors assumed he was simply repaving and he didn't correct them. Linda, meanwhile, continued her parking violations with renewed enthusiasm, perhaps sensing that Marcus had given up his complaints. The hydraulic system required precise engineering. Marcus designed a pressure-sensitive platform that would detect the weight distribution of a parked vehicle versus a moving one. The lifting mechanism would engage gradually, no violent launches that could seriously injure someone, just enough elevation to make the experience memorable and the vehicle's position precarious enough that the driver would think twice about doing it again. Installing the system proved more challenging than designing it. Marcus had to work during Linda's predictable schedule. She left for yoga at 6 a.m., returned at 8 a.m., left for various errands at 10 a.m., and usually wasn't back until late afternoon. He enlisted his brother-in-law, Tony, a contractor who asked no questions but couldn't stop grinning when Marcus explained the project. "You know this is crazy, right?" Tony said, helping position the hydraulic cylinders. "Crazy would be letting her walk all over me for the rest of my life," Marcus replied, adjusting the pressure sensors. "This is just creative property management." The system took 3 weeks to complete. Marcus installed warning signs, small, legally compliant notices that read, "Private driveway, no parking. Vehicle may be elevated for removal." He placed them strategically where they were visible but not obvious, satisfying legal requirements without alerting Linda to what was coming. Meanwhile, Linda's behavior escalated further. She began making comments to other neighbors about Marcus being antisocial and probably up to something suspicious with all of his driveway work. She filed a complaint with the city about unpermitted construction, but since Marcus had pulled all the proper permits for driveway modifications, the complaint went nowhere. The final insult came when Linda decided to make Marcus's driveway her personal parking space during her son's birthday party. Not only did she park there herself, but she directed 3 other guests to use his driveway as overflow parking. When Marcus came home to find 4 cars treating his property like a public lot, he knew the time had come to test his engineering. That evening, after the party guests had finally moved their cars, Marcus activated his system for the first time. He ran a series of tests with his own truck, fine-tuning the sensitivity and timing. Everything worked perfectly. The platform would remain stable for moving vehicles but would engage its lifting sequence when a car remained stationary for 30 seconds or more. Marcus slept better that night than he had in months. Tomorrow was Tuesday and Linda had yoga at 6 a.m. She discovered that his driveway provided the perfect angle for backing out quickly after her class, and she'd been using it as her personal turnaround space for the past week. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best solutions were the ones that let people teach themselves a lesson. Linda was about to get a very elevated perspective on property rights. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. Marcus had positioned himself in his kitchen window with his coffee and his phone's camera app already open. At exactly 6:45 a.m., right on schedule, Linda's white BMW X5 came speeding down Maple Street, taking the corner with her usual reckless confidence. What happened next unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance of physics and justice. Linda swung into Marcus's driveway with her typical entitlement, using it as a turnaround point to reverse direction after her yoga class. She threw the BMW in a park and grabbed her phone, probably texting one of her HOA cronies about some new violation she'd invented. This was her routine: park text, maybe touch up her lipstick, then back out with the screech of tires that woke half the neighborhood. Marcus started counting. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. At 20 seconds, Linda was still typing furiously on her phone, completely oblivious to the mechanical awakening happening beneath her vehicle. The pressure sensors had detected the BMW's weight distribution and confirmed it was stationary. The hydraulic system hummed quietly to life. 30 seconds. The lift engaged. What started as a gentle rise, so gradual that Linda didn't notice at first, quickly became impossible to ignore. The BMW began ascending at a steady rate of 6 inches per second, Marcus's carefully calculated speed that was fast enough to be alarming but slow enough to be safe. Linda's first reaction was confusion. She looked around as if the world had somehow shifted around her stationary vehicle. Then, as the SUV continued its upward journey, confusion transformed into panic. "What the?" Linda's voice carried clearly through her partially open window as she frantically looked around, trying to understand why her BMW was suddenly gaining altitude. She tried starting the engine, but the wheels were already off the ground. The hydraulic platform had lifted the front of her vehicle 18 inches into the air and was still rising. By the time the BMW reached its full elevation of 3 feet, high enough to make backing out impossible, but not high enough to cause vehicle damage, Linda was in full panic mode. She laid on the horn, as if that would somehow lower her back to earth. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood like an air raid siren. Marcus stepped onto his front porch, coffee mug still in hand, wearing his most innocent expression. "Morning, Linda," he called out cheerfully. "Everything okay over there?" "Get me down from here." Linda shrieked from her elevated position. "What did you do to my sour?" "I didn't do anything to your car," Marcus replied truthfully. "You're parked on my driveway, which has some new features. There are signs posted about unauthorized parking." Linda's face cycled through several shades of red as she spotted the small warning signs she'd never bothered to read. "This is insane. This is illegal. I'm calling the police." "You're welcome to," Marcus said calmly. You're trespassing on my property, and I have every right to implement security measures. The signs clearly warn that vehicles may be elevated for removal. By now, neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion and the bizarre sight of Linda's BMW suspended 3 feet in the air. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was openly laughing. Mr. Rodriguez was taking pictures. Even Linda's usual supporters seemed more amused than outraged. "How do I get down?" Linda demanded, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and genuine fear. Marcus consulted his watch with theatrical precision. The system automatically lowers after 10 minutes of continuous elevation, provided the driver remains calm and doesn't attempt to damage the mechanism by revving the engine or laying on the horn. Linda had been doing both. Of course, aggressive behavior resets the timer, Marcus added helpfully. Safety feature. The next few minutes were a masterclass in watching someone's worldview crumble in real time. Linda, who had spent years believing that rules didn't apply to her, was literally and figuratively brought down to earth by the consequences of her actions. She tried calling the police, but when she explained that she was stuck 3 feet in the air on someone else's driveway, the dispatcher seemed more confused than concerned. She tried calling her HOA contacts, but it was 7 a.m. and most reasonable people were either sleeping or getting ready for work. She tried calling her husband, but he was on a business trip and could only offer long-distance sympathy and a suggestion that maybe she should stop parking in other people's driveways. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually exactly 12 minutes, the hydraulic system began its descent cycle. The BMW lowered slowly and smoothly back to ground level, touching down with barely a whisper. Linda sat in stunned silence for a moment before starting her engine and backing out of the driveway with unprecedented caution. As she drove away, Marcus could see her in his rearview mirror, constantly checking to make sure she was still at ground level. The show was over, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Linda's revenge campaign began within hours of her aerial humiliation. By noon, Marcus had received 3 certified letters, one from Linda's attorney threatening a lawsuit for reckless endangerment and property damage, another from the HOA demanding an emergency hearing about his dangerous and unsightly modifications, and a third from the city's code enforcement office scheduling an inspection based on an anonymous complaint about unpermitted mechanical devices. Marcus had expected this. Linda wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and her connections throughout the local bureaucracy ran deep. But he spent months preparing for this exact scenario, and every document was met with a meticulously organized response. To Linda's attorney, Marcus provided a stack of evidence: photographs of Linda's repeated trespassing, timestamps showing her pattern of illegal parking, copies of his ignored complaints to various authorities, and most importantly, documentation proving every aspect of his driveway modification was legal. His hydraulic system was classified as a vehicle security device, similar to those used in private parking garages. The warning signs met all legal requirements for notification. The HOA hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community center, and Linda made sure to pack the room with her supporters. She spent 2 days calling every homeowner she could reach, painting Marcus as a dangerous vigilant who turned his property into a death trap. She conveniently omitted the part about repeatedly parking on his driveway without permission. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early carrying a presentation folder and a laptop. He'd learned long ago that preparation beats passion every time, and Linda was about to get a lesson in the difference. "Ladies and gentlemen," Linda began dramatically when the hearing started, "we're here because one of our neighbors has installed a dangerous contraption and that could have killed me yesterday morning. My vehicle was lifted 3 feet into the air without warning." The murmurs from the crowd were appropriately shocked, just as Linda had intended. Marcus stood when invited to respond. Instead of getting defensive, he opened his laptop and projected a slideshow onto the community center's wall. "I'd like to show everyone what actually happened," he said calmly. The first slide was a time-lapse video compilation from his security cameras, showing Linda's parking violations over the past 18 months. Day after day, week after week, the footage showed her BMW blocking his driveway, parking on his property, and turning his front yard into overflow parking for her events. The room grew quiet as the evidence accumulated. Marcus had condensed hours of footage into a devastating 5-minute highlight reel of Linda's systematic harassment. Mrs. Hartwell filed 14 complaints with this HOA about various neighbors over the past 2 years. Marcus continued, advancing to the next slide showing official HOA records. But 0 complaints were filed about her behavior, despite numerous residents trying to report her parking violations. As board members, you dismissed these complaints or claimed they were lost. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "My hydraulic vehicle lift system," Marcus continued, "is a legal modification to my private property, install the proper permits and clearly marked with warning signs. It's designed to prevent unauthorized parking, not to harm anyone. The system operates at speeds slower than most elevators and includes multiple safety features. He played a video of his own truck being lifted and lowered, demonstrating the system's gentle operation. Mrs. Hartwell was never in danger. She was, however, trespassing on my property in violation of both local ordinances and our HOA covenants, which clearly state that driveways are private property not subject to community use. The final slide was a legal opinion from a property rights attorney confirming that Marcus had acted within his rights as a homeowner to protect his property from repeated trespassing. The room erupted in discussion. Several neighbors who had remained silent about Linda's behavior for years suddenly felt emboldened to share their own stories. Mrs. Patterson talked about Linda parking in front of her mailbox during Bridge Club meetings. Mr. Rodriguez described how Linda had blocked his driveway during his wife's medical emergency, forcing the ambulance to park 2 houses away. Linda's face grew redder with each testimony. When the discussion ended, the HOA board voted 4-1 to dismiss all complaints against Marcus, with Linda casting the sole dissenting vote. They also voted to send Linda the formal warning about respecting property boundaries and neighbors' rights. But Linda wasn't finished. The next morning, Marcus woke to find his front yard decorated with toilet paper and his mailbox knocked over. His security cameras captured everything, including Linda's son Trevor creeping across his lawn at 2 a.m. with a baseball bat. This was the mistake Marcus had been waiting for. Vandalism was a criminal matter, not a civil dispute. The police, who had been reluctant to get involved in parking disputes, suddenly became very interested when presented with video evidence of property destruction. Trevor was arrested Friday afternoon. Linda's hysterical call to the police station, demanding they release her son and arrest Marcus instead, was recorded and somehow found its way onto the local neighborhood Facebook group. By Saturday morning, Linda had become a social media sensation for all the wrong reasons. The video of her BMW being lifted had been shared thousands of times, spawning memes and copycat revenge stories. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a creative solution to a common suburban problem. Linda's reign of terror was crumbling, but Marcus knew she had one final card to play. Desperate people make desperate moves, and Linda Hartwell was nothing if not predictable in her desperation. Linda's last stand came on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after her first aerial adventure. The viral video had made her a neighborhood pariah. Her son was facing vandalism charges, and the HOA had officially censured her behavior. But Linda, true to form, had convinced herself that she was the victim in this story. Her plan was beautifully simple in its stupidity. She would park on Marcus's driveway again, but this time she'd be ready. She'd researched hydraulic systems online and believed she found the weakness in Marcus's design. If she could jam the lifting mechanism while it was operating, she reasoned the system would break and Marcus would be liable for the damage to her vehicle. What Linda didn't understand was that Marcus had anticipated this exact scenario. His system included multiple fail-safes, including automatic shutdown if it detected interference. More importantly, his security cameras now covered every angle of his property, and he'd added motion sensors that sent alerts directly to his phone. At 7:23 a.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a trespassing alert. He looked out his window to see Linda crouched beside her BMW with what appeared to be a crowbar, trying to pry open the access panel to his hydraulic system. She parked directly over the lifting platform and was attempting to sabotage the mechanism from underneath. Marcus called 911 first. Criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism were felonies. Then he activated his system manually from his phone app, overriding the normal 30-second delay. Linda was still under her BMW when it began to rise. The hydraulic platform lifted smoothly as designed, but Linda's position created an unexpected complication. She was caught half underneath the rising vehicle, clinging to the BMW's undercarriage like a deranged mechanic. Her screams could be heard 3 blocks away as she found herself ascending along with her SUV, dangling 5 feet above Marcus's driveway. Oh God, put me down," Linda shrieked, her legs kicking frantically in the air as she clung to the BMW's running board. Marcus stepped outside, phone already recording. "Linda, you need to let go and drop down. It's only 5 feet. I can't. I'll die. You'll be fine. It's like jumping off a low-diving board. I am wearing heels." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on the growing crowd of neighbors who had emerged to witness Linda's final performance. Mrs. Patterson was openly cackling. Mr. Rodriguez was live-streaming on Facebook. Even the mailman had stopped his route to watch the show. The police arrived within minutes, followed closely by the fire department and an ambulance, not because Linda was in actual danger, but because she was screaming like she was being murdered. The first responders took one look at the situation and immediately understood they were dealing with the now-famous flying Karen incident they'd all seen online. "Ma'am, you need to let go of the vehicle," the fire captain called up to Linda. "We'll catch you." "No, make him put me down." "Ma'am, you're trespassing on this gentleman's property and appear to be vandalizing his equipment. You need to come down so we can sort this out." It took 20 minutes of negotiation, but Linda finally released her death grip on the BMW and dropped into the waiting arms of two firefighters. She was uninjured except for a bruised ego and grass stains on her yoga pants, but she immediately began demanding that Marcus be arrested for attempted murder. The police, however, were more interested in the crowbar and the damaged access panel. Linda's plan to sabotage the hydraulic system was captured in perfect detail by Marcus's security cameras. Combined with her previous vandalism charges and multiple trespassing violations, Linda found herself facing serious criminal charges. The final twist came when Linda's husband Tom returned from his business trip that evening. He'd spent the week watching his wife become an international meme, fielding calls from reporters, and trying to explain to his colleagues why his wife was famous for dangling from a car in midair. Tom had reached his breaking point. "I'm done, Linda," he announced in front of half the neighborhood, who were still gathered to watch the aftermath. "I'm filing for divorce. You've completely lost your mind." Linda's empire collapsed in a single day. Her son moved in with his father, her husband filed for divorce and moved out, and the HOA voted to remove her from the board pending the resolution of her criminal charges. The house went up for sale within a month. Marcus's driveway returned to its intended purpose, parking his own vehicles. The hydraulic system remained active, but it was never needed again. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the consequences of unauthorized parking on Maple Street. 6 months later, Marcus received a postcard from Linda's new address in Arizona. It was a picture of a cactus with a simple message: "You win." No signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Marcus pinned the postcard to his refrigerator. Right next, the framed screenshot of Linda dangling from her BMW that had become his favorite conversation starter. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't a dish served cold. Sometimes it was a dish served at an elevation of 5 feet, with a side of public humiliation and a garnish of felony charges. The hydraulic driveway had done more than solve a parking problem. It had launched Linda Hartwell clean out of his life, and sometimes the most elegant engineering solutions were the ones that let gravity do most of the work. The end. Author's note: this story is a work of fiction. While satisfying to imagine, readers should not attempt to install hydraulic lift systems in their driveways without proper permits, professional engineering consultation, and consideration for safety and legal liability. Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving to a better neighborhood.